This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. This episode is part of a series in partnership with the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation that we like to call Israel Behind the Headlines, delving deep into and unpacking issues underlying our lives here in Israel. My guest today is a professor of communication at Sapir College in the south of Israel, whose most recent book, Women, Secularism and Belief, A Sociology of Belief in the Jewish-Israeli Secular Landscape, was published only in Hebrew, soon maybe in English, was published last year. Professor Hagar Lahav, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello.
So the original title of your book in Hebrew is Believing Secular Women. Let's start by unpacking this ostensible oxymoron. Doesn't the fact that a person is believing discount his or her secularism?
The name of the book really is Secular Believer Women. And I think that it's this combination of being secular and believer is what interested in the book. Now, let me start by some number. A quarter of the Jewish Israelis are secular believers, which means that they identify themselves as secular, but still believe in God. Now, we don't know anything about them, about which God or what is the God that they believe in. We do know that in Israel, people tend to identify themselves secular according to their observation or the level of observation of the halacha, of the Jewish law. So we should not be very surprised that there are people who say, I reject the halacha. I don't think it's God's word. I don't think it's oblige me in any way. But still, I believe in God. And the funny thing is that on one hand, it's so obvious. It's, yeah, sure, why not? I can believe in God without, observing the Shabbat or eating only kosher food. And on the other hand, the Israeli sociology did not recognize this large sector, about 25% of Jewish Israelis that are secular believer. And this is the first book about them, actually the first research about them.
Isn't it just perhaps an attempt to put a sociological spin on the old truism that in Israel, the synagogue that an Israeli wouldn't set foot in is an Orthodox one, meaning that there is a very clear separation in the Israeli landscape, and we'll get to that concept in a minute, that in the Israeli landscape there's a very clear separation between what is religious and what is non-religious. And anything that doesn't fall very neatly into those categories is just ignored.
I agree that in Israel, Judaism and Orthodox Judaism is actually the same thing, but I don't think that this makes the liberal Jewish movements, such as the Reform or the Conservative, a non-religious movement. The Reform and the Conservative they are keeping some kind of loyalty to the halacha. It doesn't have a veto, but it does has a vote. They centered their activity in the synagogue. These are religious, non-Orthodox, but still religious movements. Secular Jews does not want to belong to a religious movement, whether it's the Orthodox or other. They want to be secular, and they have a good reason for it.
So what does it really mean to be secular? And also it kind of lends itself to Judaism in a way, or maybe Judaism lends itself to the concept of secularism because it is a practice-based religion. Faith in and of itself doesn't carry a lot of weight in Judaism. So looking at Jewish Israeli women that are secular and believers, why do you think that the factor of faith, of belief, plays a part here if it's not such a big deal in Judaism in the first place?
I think that saying that faith is not a big deal in Judaism is a little problematic. I agree that it's not as important as in Protestantism, for example, but I don't think that it can be ignored, especially when we're taking into account the Eastern Judaism or the Eastern way of thinking about Judaism, in which the preserving of the parents' way of life is very important. And one important thing in the parents' way of life is belief in God. So maybe from the Ashkenazi Western way of looking at it, you can say there's no theology, there's no advanced thinking about what God is. It's only practice. But it's not only practice. It's practice and believing, a personal, deep belief.
What's the point of focusing on belief when practice is really what calls the shot?
So, secular, I think that there are few things that characterize the secular, Jewish secular. First, they don't understand the halakha as obligated law. Second, they have a lot of critiques about the Jewish religion. Third, they hold some values that we used to see them as secular, like skepticism, egalitarianism, freedom of thought. So they resist the way that the Jewish religion presents such values or the way they understand it. On the other hand, they are Jew. Their values are, in a way, Jewish values. Now, the question is, if we're taking out the religion part or away or aside, no, not away, but we put it a little bit aside and ask what Jewish values may be without the Jewish religion, here we are getting into a difficult question. And here the Israeli case gives us a unique opportunity because it's the only place in the world and the only the only time in the world that Judaism that is separated from religion can exist, and it's an opportunity for us to try to understand what are still the Jewish values that unite us. And it's not only important in the Israeli context, it's very important in the all Jewish context, because if there are some Jewish values, and I'm not talking about some essential, right? I don't think that there is only one Judaism. And still, if there are some values that are connected to our historical culture on the one hand, and that we can agree on the other hand, I think we should try to look for them because it's tremendously important to the preservation of the Jewish people that will be able to find such values.
Actually, it sounds to me like the secular believers that you're talking about are more or less, mutatis mutandis, as they say, the adherents of progressive denominations in Judaism, whether it's Reform or conservative, that are a minority, I would even say a negligible minority in Israel, but exist in full force elsewhere. Do you see them as, under the same umbrella of secular believers, or are they two completely separate categories?
They are separate categories. As I said before, reforms or modern Jewish denomination are still religious movements. Secular believer Jew do not want and don't have to belong to a religious denomination to be able to fulfill and express their Judaism. This is the unique thing that the state of Israel gives to Judaism that no other place or time gave, or will give in the future.
Yeah. What does it mean? I want to tackle the notion of the secular landscape, or maybe the religious landscape, and the secular landscape as the antinomy of that. In Israel, where it is a Jewish state, some would even venture as far as saying it is a theocracy of sorts. I mean, it's a country where Jewish religion, is very present in public life, and wherever you go, it's almost unavoidable. How does that affect the group of people that you're looking at? Because on the one hand, I mean, they are Jewish, even if they don't want to. I mean, involuntarily Jewish, if you will. On the other hand, it gives them some sort of backdrop to bounce against.
Well, the state of Israel protects the Jewish identity. Not only the state, by the way, the markets as well. You can see, matzot in Pesach, or the same way that you will see Christmas trees during Christmas in the United States, for example, right? So the Jewish identity is protected. This protection, it's not a word, it's not a good way, but maybe the fact that the Jewish identity is protected allows Jewish Israelis to get out of the synagogue, to look at the halacha from the outside, to read the Bible while being in the same places where things happen, and be able to not only imagine it, but also to converse with it and even argue with it. Well, you're telling me here in the Bible that such and such happened, and I'm staying here and I'm looking around and I say, no way it happened like the description. Okay, so I have this ability, again, because of the identity protection, I have the ability to negotiate Judaism in a much wider way than a Jew in the diaspora can, because you won't lose your Judaism. Maximum, you'll lose your religiosity.
Right.
For example, in feminist theology, there's a talk about post-Christianity. feminist theologians who left Christianity because of its patriarchal nature and tries to create new theologies. Now, there is no post-Jewish theology, and I expect that it won't happen, because even if you want to live the Jewish religion, you don't live the Jewish identity. What we do have is secular or post-secular Jewish originated feminist theology, or at least we don't have it yet, but I'm trying to find out where can we start.
So let's stay on the feminist issue for a minute. So you deliberately chose women as the objects of your study, 31 of them, if I'm not mistaken, right? That you interviewed, with a view to developing some sort of, as you say, a feminist post-secular Jewish framework. What for, is my question. Why women?
Why women?
I mean, what is the added value of this feminist prism that you wouldn't get by looking at men and women together?
If I had more resources, I would interview men too, but I think that it is more relevant to women. Israel is a very interesting case in the sense that all over the world, women score higher than men in religiosity indexes. The only place in the world that it does not happen is in Israel. About 20% of both men and women in Israel identify themselves as atheists, or at least they don't say that they believe in God.
Well, is this a parameter for religiosity in those indexes?
Not always,
Okay.
Unfortunately. One of the problems is that the indexes are biased in several ways.
Methodologically, you mean?
Yeah. First of all, most of them tend to look at practices, and only at practices, or practices and belonging, but they ask very little about belief. Furthermore, when they ask things about belief, like, do you believe in God? They stop there. What is the God that you believe in? What is the meaning of being in relationships with God? Why do you believe in God? Those questions are never asked. And talking about practices, there's a lot of confusion. You see different polls, for example, which use different notions. Sometimes they talk about mitzvot. Sometimes they talk about halachot. Sometimes they talk about practices. Sometimes they talk about observance. And so what exactly someone means when he say that he shomer mitzvot or shomer halachot, well, most of us, we keep at least some halachot, whether we like it or not. I mean, it's a mitzvah to live in Israel, so all the Jewish Israelis fulfill at least this mitzvah. Most of Israeli circumstance their sons, celebrate holidays. So what does it mean? And by the way, most of them does not murder and does not
and respect
steal.
their elders.
Yeah, so what does it mean to be an observant? If we don't understand what does it mean to be an observant, it's not surprising that we don't understand what it means to be secular.
Right. So going back to the women.
Oh,
right?
going
Yes.
yeah. So what I'm doing or what I've developed is like a new niche in sociology, which I call sociology of belief. Sociology of belief is interested in the intersection of believing in God and sociological belonging. So, for me, gender is a super important index of social belonging and social identity. And you see here already the first intersection between believing and gender and being a woman. Furthermore, sociology of belief are interested also in the theology. It's interested in the question, what do people believe in? Without supposing that it's, false belief or something. It looks on the phenomenology of the belief. And when you look at it like that, you are becoming very interested in theology. And I have to say, I'm a secular person, and still I became very interested in theology.
Believer.
A secular believer.
Yeah.
And when I became interested in theology, I understood that in a way, this is the deepest thing. If you don't go there, if you don't touch it, if you don't touch the Kodesh HaKodashim, you won't be able to change anything. And Judaism, I think, need to be changed because of its patriarchal nature and because of other things like its chauvinism and so on. And as more as I became interested in theology, I better understood its political power. And then I became interested in the question, how can we use theology to strengthen women, to strengthen our position in Israeli society or in the world? And what can Judaism contribute to this struggle?
Is it because religion is such a powerful player in Israeli society?
Religion is a powerful player everywhere. So I don't think that Israel is different from other places in this exact issue. Well, think about the notion of God, and think how many people have died and lived because of this notion. Now, this notion it's no doubt, it was adopted and designed by men. But this does not mean that women cannot use it for their own needs. It does mean that they have to own it and change it in the way that it will work for them and not for men.
But isn't the, fault of a better word, orthodox, small o, notion of secularism, meaning anything that is not religious, serve women better in this sense? Doing away with God altogether, with everything that it entails, whether it's life and death, patriarchy, what have you. What I'm saying is, isn't going back into the muddied waters of secularism and religion and, all this many shades of grey that you describe in your book only fail women's liberation? I'm sorry to be using all sorts of...
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had an encounter with a very prominent and important women sociologist who told me something like, we worked so hard to get rid of God, why are you insisting of pulling it back? And I think that, to be blind, you should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. For me, traditional religion is in a way a bath water.
Right.
But the belief the feeling that God exists, and we probably won't talk about what I mean when I'm saying God, but let's say the feeling that there's a force of good in the world, and that this force helps me and helps other to live better and to create a better world, to contribute to tikkun olam, is a very precious baby, and we should not give it up.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the difference between Ashkenazi Judaism and Sephardic Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see, like, in if you break down your interviewees, do you see them neatly spread along this spectrum of Sephardi versus Ashkenazi in the perception of what is religion?
Well, it's never neatly.
Sure. But more or less.
If I'm trying to tell a story, I can offer you two stories about how a woman becomes secular believer. If she is Ashkenazi, the most
the default
acceptable, the default story will be that she was brought up in atheist family, or agonist, or maybe just a family that never mentioned God. And somewhere during her growing up, she decided, or she felt, or she had an experience that made her realize, or made her think that she needs, or she wants God in her life. And then she went to look for it. The other story, the Mizrahi story, is that you were probably raised up in either Mesorti, traditionalist, or a religious family, and in some point you left the religion in the sense that you stopped, obeyed all the mitzvah and the halacha, but God stayed with you. They bring it with them to secularism.
Across, yeah.
So there are two different narratives that bring women from different places to the same place, but through very different experiences and direction of voyage, if you'd like.
Yeah. Also, methodological question. Maybe it's a tiny one, but I'm interested. How do you find women that are secular believers, given that the category barely exists? I mean, you can't just say I'm looking for a secular believer, because there aren't that many who. Surely there are many secular believers, but aren't many people who are consciously so.
Well, it was easier than I thought. I just posted a message saying that I'm looking for secular women who believe in God, or in a higher or deeper forces or dimensions or agent or whatever, and whether they call it God or not. And the response was amazing. Within 2 weeks, I got more than 100 applies to be interviewed. And there was, I think, if we have time, I'll tell you a little story about one of my interviewees who arrived to our meeting in the coffee shop, and she sat down and she said, "I'm so angry." And I asked her, "Why are you so angry?" And she said, "I don't believe that I never thought about the notion of secular believer. I am secular, and I know that I'm a secular, and I know that I believe in God, but I never united those two kinds of knowledge to one identity. How did it pass me without me giving it a name?" And she said, I'm amazed. I'm 40 something years old. I think a lot about it. It's very important. The belief is very important part of my life. Being a secular is an important part of my life, and I never put it together. And it's so funny. This is what happened when there's a sociological phenomenon without a name. People cannot relate to it.
That's why we have sociologists.
Yeah.
Exactly. What about broadening the scope to non-Israelis? I mean, it's we touched upon it several times during this conversation, but it might bring in a whole new array of perspectives and insights.
Yeah. My current study involves also Jewish American women who believe in some kind of spiritual, religious force or dimension, etc., and don't belong to any denomination. They call themselves post-denominational or Jews of no religion, or there's a lot of names. The acceptable name right now is Jews of no religion. It's a growing group within American Judaism. And there, too, we see that by polls that about half of those Jews of no religion believe in God. And again, it's the same question. If you are a Jew, but you don't have a religion, you don't belong to the Jewish religion, what is God for you?
Yeah. So you can say, maybe to try to put it put a bottom line to it, that belief having been perhaps a separate value in the Jewish existence, whether it's religious or tradition or, just, tradition that is not necessarily religious, is gradually making its way back into the so-called tradition. It's something that you are brought up with, that you take with you, that is part and parcel of your Jewish thinking, just like, I don't know, maybe to use a cliche, just like Isaac Bashevis Singer or Woody Allen.
I think so, yeah. Personally, when I started to get into the question of feminism and theology and how it goes together, or feminism and belief in God, my first instinct was to run as far as I can from Judaism. And I practiced and study Buddhism for several years until I understood that it doesn't matter how much Buddhism I will study, I will never understand Buddhism the way I understand Judaism. Because this is, if we can use the beautiful words, the Hebrew words of Chernichovsky, this is Tavnit Nof Moladeti, the form of my,
your
my
native landscape.
Exactly. Yeah. This is my native landscape, and I have to work in it.
Yeah.
It gives me also a lot of freedom, right? Because if it's me, I can afford it.
Yes.
But I have to if you will, to accept the fact that God made me a Jew and work with Jewish materials.
Yeah. All right. Professor Hagar Lahav, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're most welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And also many thanks to Itai Shalem, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their generous support. And now we've got a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. Good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Please check out our archive. It has something like 800 interviews, all free to download. Like us on Facebook, follow me and my co-host Yael, who will be back next week. Follow us on Twitter. And most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from me here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.